Good morning. Thank you so much for inviting me to your Veterans Day Assembly. I just drove into town and boy, do we live in a beautiful place. This morning, as I sat across from my wife at our breakfast table, I said to her, "Betty, in your wildest dreams, would you believe that I would be addressing the entire student body of the Orcas Island School District and a large component of our community?" And she looked at me as serious as a heart attack and said, "Bill, you're never in my wildest dreams." I hope that works. Oh, I worked on this presentation the last couple of days because I'm not a public speaker normally, and I wanted to present myself and my service properly. So I was very much involved, especially yesterday, with this task, and it didn't really sink into me the impact of our election yesterday, but it did this morning. And I think the elephant in the room is that we're all concerned, and I think the majority of us are concerned, and if the election had gone the other way, a minority of us would be concerned in this audience. But there's one thing that gives me a great deal of strength to face the future, and that is Betty and I have been lucky enough to really develop a relationship with our Senator Patty Murray. We went back to the last inauguration and met with her, and we've been back every January since, and gotten to know her as being such a competent, hardworking, bright, thoughtful, just an exceptional person. And it's so comforting to know that she has our back, and that our government has provided checks and balances to keep things right. And that's a huge success of our country, and that remains totally intact. So I'm optimistic, and I hope that we can all get that way. Anyhow, I'm here to give you a little peek at my military service. And I served in Vietnam most of the entire year of 1968. I was in a combat infantry division, the 9th Infantry Division in the Mekong Delta, which is the southern part of South Vietnam. I've always been proud of my military service, my Vietnam service, and I've always displayed that service by, I've always had my Purple Heart framed and hung on my office wall from the time I returned from Vietnam. And Vietnam gave me two attributes that have served me so well throughout my life. And one of those is that I never had to question my ability to perform in a life-threatening situation. And that has served me well throughout my life, to have that confidence. Another thing that Vietnam gave me is a base point for comparing situations throughout my life. And when things get tough and my life's not going as well as I'd like it to, or I'm in a bad situation, I can always fall back to the knowledge that compared to whatever that situation is, that being shot at, compared to being shot at, it pretty much is trivial. And I can apply that same concept to this election, that compared to being shot at, the election results are really are really insignificant. So I'll move on through my presentation and try to give you a glimpse of a bit of my Vietnam experience. I have been on ORCA since 1992. My kids have gone to this school. I've been on the school board. I'm involved with the community, and so I'd like to think that I'm truly one of you. Vietnam is a long ways away. Last night I showed this presentation to a good friend, and he reminded me that, it's more than 9 time zones, and he's absolutely right. It's 15 time zones and 7,000 miles. During my tour in Vietnam, I took hundreds of photographs, and my daughter singled out one that she liked the best, and I thought it would be fun to show it to you guys. This is when I was on a rest and recuperation R&R week at a local R&R center in Vung Tau, Vietnam, and I don't know what provoked me to do this selfie, but it's one of the original selfies. When I first arrived at my duty station in Dong Tam, right on the Mekong Delta, Mekong River, one of my first assignments was to build a bunker for my mortar platoon. And here I am, sunburned and a rookie in my first few days being in country. My unit was primarily attached to the Navy, and we lived most of the time on barrack ships. We would go to our missions and combat in these armored landing craft. And these are boats that you can see by the people in the photograph. They're not very big. They were able to go up the small canals, and when we made contact with the enemy, we would beach those craft at the banks of the river or canal and charge off with guns ablazing. We also were delivered to our missions and patrols in Huey helicopters, and because the Delta is so wet, we could only sustain for about a month or 6 weeks off the ships, because we would be so we'd have so much problem with our feet being in mud all the time that we'd have to go back to the base camp for a month or so and dry out. And during that time, we would go to our patrols and missions via helicopters or via armored personnel carriers. And I took this photograph with a little 16mm camera that I carried in my helmet band. And the reason it's so blurry is because there was so much vibration. When you're driving on a paved road with a steel track vehicle, that's quite a bunch of jiggle. But however we went to our missions and patrols, and when we got there, we were always infantry soldiers providing boots on the ground. And this is me carrying a radio, and those palm trees may look like Hawaii, but believe me, they are not. The Vietnam War was a significant conflict. And this slide represents American deaths, American killed in our conflicts throughout the history of the United States. And as you can see, Vietnam is almost 10 times the size of Iraq and Afghanistan combined. Certainly significantly larger than the Korean War, and over half the deaths, American deaths, as the World War I. So it's a big deal, and lots of lives, and of course over 1 million lives sacrificed or given towards our conflicts and preserving our freedoms. All 58,000 of those names are on the Vietnam Memorial that was dedicated 35 years ago tomorrow, and I was fortunate enough to be there, and it was really a coming out for Vietnam vets that day. It was the first time that I knew of since the war that a large group of veterans assembled, and we marched in groups of our state. Each state gathered up the vets that were there, and we marched around the mall of the Capitol, and it was quite a significant event and a healing event for those of us who really had been not accepted very well when we came home. A common occurrence at that wall is for people to do pencil rubbings. There are volunteers there, and I've been to the wall many times, at least 10 times, and no matter what the weather or the cold or what have you, there's always somebody there making a rubbing. There's volunteers that provide these little pieces of paper and pencils. I was in Vietnam all of 1968, and that was the height of the Vietnam War protests. After the Tet Offensive, there was a huge outcry when Walter Cronkite declared that this war we should get out. It really turned the nation, and Walter Cronkite was the star newscaster in the country at the time, and there became more and more and more war protests. And when I came home in January of '69, there were so many protests going on that I was discharged in New Jersey. And the reason was that the Oakland Center was so overwhelmed with protesters that they flew us all the way across the country to avoid being harassed and ridiculed. And I had to make my way home from the East Coast. My Vietnam experience continues to this day. As recently as this August, my band of brothers, these men who I served in Vietnam with, we met, and we've gotten together about 4 times now over this last half century. But we're in contact often. And these men, 4 of them are my platoon mates, and the fella in the blue jacket in the middle, he was our commanding officer in our company, and we reconnected with him at our prior reunion 3 years ago, and got to know him again, and he came out this last year and joined us. So that concludes my my reminiscing, and I hope that that I've kept your interest and given you a little peek of what I did during the war. Thank you very much.